Welcome to another edition of Fun Friday. My name is Kelly Cody Brookins and I'm the 4-H agent here in Columbia County. And today we have another great STEM activity for you. We're in the kitchen again, but we are not going to be making anything that we can eat. We are going to explore density by creating a 7-layer liquid tower. So let's review what density is again. So density is an object's comparison of mass and volume. You may remember the equation from school, density equals mass divided by volume. So basically density is everything that is packed into a particular volume. So if we use that equation, density equals mass divided by volume, then we can assume that if the weight or the mass of an object goes up, but the volume stays the same, that its density is going to go up as well. Vice versa, if the mass or the weight goes down, but the volume stays the same, then that object's density is going to go down. For today's activity, we are going to explore that concept of mass and volume with density by layering liquids on top of each other. So let's start off with what we have here. These are the things you're going to need to do this little experiment. You will want a little bit of food coloring, and I'll tell you about that in a second. Honey, light syrup, so this can be light corn syrup. We have some Karo syrup here. Blue dishwashing soap. Also right here we have water. Right here is vegetable oil. Here is rubbing alcohol. We actually dyed it a nice little red color with the food coloring. So when we layer it, it can distinguish itself from the things surrounding it. And then we also have some baby oil. And each one of these has the same volume, so that it's each 1/2 cup, and that's important. So make sure you put a 1/2 cup as you're pouring into your tower. Now, if you have a thinner cylinder, which would be ideal, but we don't have one, you may just want to do a 1/4 cup. But depending on how big your container is, you may need to do a little bit more than that. So instead of doing a 1/4 cup, we decided to do a 1/2 cup so that you could see it. So as we begin adding our liquids into our container, it is important that we put them in by the most dense to the least dense. And you can do this in several different ways. Ideally, if you have a turkey baster, that is the best because you can gently put each liquid into your container. We didn't have one, so we are actually using this kind of ladle that has a dip in it so we can gently pour. If you pour each liquid into it too fast, they're going to mix up. They will eventually separate because of density, but if you want to make it so you don't have to sit there and wait for them to separate, it's important that you do it slowly. And that's what we did with our first liquid, which was honey. And honey has a density of 1.36. So for comparison, water is our neutral at 1. It has a density of 1. So this has a higher density than water does. So we first put in the honey, that's 1.36 density. Next, we went ahead and put in our Karo syrup. And this did something really interesting. It has a density of 1.33. So honey and corn syrup are only about 0.03 apart in density. And it was very evident, and I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but you can see that the corn syrup is layered above the honey, but it almost kind of dips in the middle. They are very similar in color, so it's a little hard to distinguish, but they are so close in density that they almost kind of go into each other, but they do separate. All right, so we went ahead and started our layer tower. The first liquid that we put in is honey, and honey has a density of 1.36. So for comparison, water is our neutral, and it has a density of 1. So honey is the most dense, which is why we put it in first, and we did that carefully using our ladle. The next liquid that we used was light corn syrup, and its density is 1.33. So the difference between honey and the light corn syrup in density is only 0.03, and it's actually evident here in our layer. So you can see that here the vegetable oil has separated from the honey, but when I first put it in, it kind of concaved into the honey for a while and really took some time to separate, and that's because the densities are very close. The next liquid that we added is Blue Dish Soap. And I do suggest using Blue Dish Soap because a lot of the liquids that we have are naturally clear or yellow, and that just kind of helps distinguish it from the other liquids, so it's easier for you to see. So we added our Blue Dish Soap, and that has a density of 1.03. So the next liquid that we are going to add a half a cup of is water, and its density, like I said, is 1. So we will do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and add the water. And as you can see, it's going to mix a little bit into your soap. It may even bubble a little bit. And right now it looks a little mixed up, but it will separate. And again, that's going to be pretty close to it. It may take some time to separate because their densities are very close. So I'm going to go ahead and do the next one, which is vegetable oil, which looks like this. And don't try to dye this because your food coloring is not going to mix into there because oil, water, and other liquids don't mix very well. So we're going to go ahead and put this in here, and I'm going to put this in the ladle and see if I can control it a little bit better. And the slower you do it, probably the better. So we've added our water and vegetable oil. We're just going to take a couple minutes here to let that all separate out. After we let our tower sit a little bit, the water with a density of 1 settled over the dish soap, and the vegetable oil is now layered over the water, and the vegetable oil has a density of 0.91, which is less than 1, which means it is going to flow on top of the water. The next liquid that we have is rubbing alcohol. The density of rubbing alcohol is 0.87. So I have this measured out here. Like I said, I dyed it red so that I'll be able to distinguish it from vegetable oil. Let's see if we can carefully add this. So on top of our rubbing alcohol, we are going to add baby oil, and baby oil is the least dense of all the liquids that we're adding, which is why we're putting it up at the top. And it has a density of 0.83. So rubbing alcohol was 0.87, so it is a little bit less. So that should sit right on top. Now, a good question you might ask is, if I didn't put these in the correct order, would they still separate? What do you think? Yes, they would, because they're still going to separate by density. It's just going to take a little bit longer if you do it all mixed up. This way is just a time saver. But I'll show you at the end, if we do mix them up, they will all settle again into those layers. So let's go ahead and let's add our last little bit, which is the baby oil. Top, and you can see that almost immediately it has separated at the top. So we're going to wait a couple minutes and let this sit. We're going to come back and I'm going to show you a couple of cool things you can do to keep exploring density. So we've let our tower of liquid sit here for a couple of minutes so we can really get it separated. And one thing that I noticed is with the dish soap, the water, and the vegetable oil, you can see a very slight difference, which is probably going to be hard to see on the video. But one thing I would suggest is when you dye your rubbing alcohol, I probably used too much food coloring, so it made it kind of dark. and I think that's reflecting back on the lighter liquid beneath it, so it's a little bit harder to see. So I would suggest maybe making it just a little bit lighter. That should help you distinguish it. But we've got a pretty good layering system going on here to really show that density. So here we have a screw with a bolt, and we have plastic beads. So we're gonna drop these into our cylinder here and see which one floats and maybe which one sinks to the bottom. And that will tell us the density of these objects roundabout. Especially if we know what liquid it's floating in, then we kind of know what density it's at. So we're gonna put this in first, see what happens. All right, so that sunk straight to the bottom. So what do you think? Is the screw denser than the honey is? Yeah, so the density of honey is 1.36, so that bolt is definitely denser than honey, which is why it went all the way down to the bottom. Next, we've got our beads. So we'll put these in here. And they are not floating at the top. They did sink a little bit. Let's see. So I can see these floating. Let's see if you can see this. Maybe Miss Karen, who's helping me today, can zoom in. That blue layer with the dish soap, they are floating right in there. Might be a little bit hard to see, but they're right there. So we're gonna assume that if the dish soap's density is 1.03, then those plastic beads have a density right around there, maybe in between water and the dish soap. So right around 1, a little bit more because it is sinking below that water. So this is a fun way to test objects and what their density is, because we do know the density of these liquids. So that gives us an idea of what the density of these objects is. So that's pretty neat. You can try different things. You could try, one suggestion was a cherry tomato. You could try that if you'd like. Any really kind of object, you can see if it sinks or if it floats. If it floats, that means it's going to be more dense than the liquid below it, and if it sinks, that means it's more dense than the liquid below it. All right, so the next and last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix all of these liquids up in here so I can show you that once you mix it, I promise you it's all going to layer back out again. So I'm going to mix it up. The honey kind of makes it gooey. All right, look at that. All right, so as you can see, it is not a pretty layered anymore. So we are gonna let that sit. Now at the end of this video, I'll post a picture after it's all settled so you can see that everything has been layered back out again. Well, if you have any questions, please let us know. I hope you've enjoyed your Fun Friday STEM lesson for this week. We hope to see you back next week for our next lesson.